Welcome to PreVetted Podcast, a blend of tech and leadership. Today, our guest is Elisa Camahort Page. Hello, Elisa. How are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
I am doing great. As you can see, I took you outdoors,
Yes,
so
I
it's
love
a
it.
beautiful day. Elisa co-founded BlogHer. She grew it from a bootstrap startup to a VC-backed 30 million media company, which is an amazing achievement. Congratulations.
Thank you.
It must not have been easy, but
No.
it's an amazing milestone, right? And currently you're working on optionality, get shit done as a growth guide, right? So before we get a little bit more on, on your projects, how about you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I am born and raised in California. You're not too far from me right now. But both my parents were immigrants, and so I'm a first generation American. And actually, I think one of the most important things to know about me is that my first career that I wanted to pursue and what I studied in school had nothing to do with either of my next two careers. I was a theater major and a vocal minor, and I moved to New York and I pursued like the starving artist lifestyle. And when at the age of just 25, I was like, you know what? I don't actually want to be a starving artist, emphasis on the starving. And I really missed California. So I came home and I took a job to have a job, with a friend of the family in the commodities industry. And I knew nothing about it. And I ended up learning on the job. And I stayed in that industry for about 7 years. And at the time, this was really pre internet usage so much. And so when I wanted to continue advancing in my career, I looked around and figured out the commodities business was centered in New York and Chicago. I didn't want to move there. So I'm like, oh, I need to do something else. And I kind of looked around and I said, oh, well, this tech thing seems pretty important here in my home area. So why don't I figure out if I like it and if I'm any good at it, if I have any aptitude for it? And there was no reason really to think that I would. My own pursuit was very liberal arts oriented, very arts oriented. Certainly my dad and my brother and my sister were all way more, technically inclined and all of that, but not me. But I'd already kind of figured out that I could learn on the job and that you need to learn on any job you go to, you're going to end up needing to learn the specifics, the particulars. So I got started in a really traditional, like newly public hardware company, hardware focused, hardware and semiconductor. And I started at the bottom and in the marketing department because I figured that was a foot in. Now, I happened to have really great timing because that was during the dot-com boom. It was the mid to late 90s, and things were just hopping here. Like if you worked hard, if you were smart, if you had ambition, you could go pretty far. Of course, that meant that I also lived through the dot-com spiral down, which was a lot less fun. But once again, I kind of figured out I knew how to learn. I could learn on the job. And the second really important thing in addition to confidence in myself was confidence that wherever you go, there are people who would love to help you understand what they do more. And it's that Mr. Rogers thing about find the helpers. A lot of engineers, if you want to sit down and learn what they're working on and the guts of the technology, they would be so excited to like whiteboard for you exactly how that works because they're passionate about it, and they appreciate someone coming in and having interest. So between knowing I could learn and knowing I could find people who would be happy to help me learn, it really served me well throughout my years, all the years pre-BlogHer when I was working in that industry.
Very, very interesting. Yes. So you were mentioning that you studied theater, right? So how does theater help you further down the road on your
Thank you
career?
for asking that question. I love that question. A lot of people will say, I like to hire people who worked on sports, who did sports, because it's team building and leadership and, understanding, whatever it is. And I'm like, you wanna experience team building? Try doing collaborative art like theater, music, orchestra, dance. The thing is, it's also you're creating something from nothing. A team comes together, they create something out of nothing. They have a limited time frame and it's deadline oriented. There's a performance out there, 2 months or whatever. You got to do it. And the other thing about theater is that Theater is a place, especially when you're younger, where a lot of folks who maybe don't fit in a lot of other places coalesce because there's a job and a role for everyone. There's the backstage crew, there's the actors on stage, there's the orchestra, there's the people out in the front of the house design, maybe the designers. These are people who all have different skill sets, bring their different strengths to the table. Often you have a lot of people who maybe are not super, you think that all theater people are going to be extroverts, but they're not. There are lots of people who are awkward or misfits out in the regular world. And so you learn not just to build a team, but you learn to build a team that is full of people who are not just like you and how you all pull together. So I think there's very little you can do to match what you learn from creating theater and creating art and working together to make something out of nothing. That's the startup journey, right?
Right, right. While you were talking about that, I was thinking it's both magical and brutal, right? And it's when the curtain goes up, that's it. You have everything on the game, and one single mistake can screw everything, right?
You
And
have to
the
think
show
on your
must go on. Yes,
Yes, you
yes,
have
yes.
to think on your feet and you have to, something goes wrong, you keep going, and you figure out a way to fill in the gap. I've been on stage and forgotten my lines. I've been on stage and somebody else forgot theirs. I've been on stage and had a costume malfunction. I've been on stage like where someone doesn't enter when they're supposed to. You just kind of like, there's very little that stops the show and everyone, and sometimes that's an orchestra leader, sometimes the singer skips a whole verse, they get confused and they skip, and the orchestra, 30 people, have to be like, okay, flipping through the pages. I've seen all these things happen. And so that's a really good point. And thank you for adding that to my list for later. But yeah, you gotta think on your feet. You gotta keep going. You gotta figure out how to fix a problem in real time, while you're like fixing it sort of at the underneath level, while at the surface level, you're continuing to go.
Right, right. And what I've done chorus for
Mm.
7 years, and same thing. It's we organize events, we
Yeah.
have dinners to collect funds for to pay the not the teacher, the director, right? Everybody was voluntaries except the director. We were paying a salary, so we will organize dinners, concerts, and we go to churches to sing. They have the best acoustic ever, right? And every time you get on the stage, every time is different. I mean, you're thinking, well, the experience will make you tough and brave, and in a way it does. But every time you get there, every time you get on the stage, you get nervous. You start sweating. You start doubting of yourself. All of that happens, and then the difference is with your experience, you know how to process that rather than freaking out, right? So it's not like it goes away, right?
Right, right, because it is so new every time. But that's the thing. That's why I find it so helpful for working, especially in a dynamic industry like tech is and like media is that everything time you tackle it, you could have a lot of the same team members. You could have a lot of the same, like I've done multiple Sondheim shows. So it's the same composer, same director, a lot of the same performers, but you're still tackling something fresh. And I feel like that's one thing I really learned from my startup journey was that what worked before, you got to constantly remain open to the idea that some of that is still going to work, but some of that is always going to need refreshing. It's dynamic. You cannot do the same things and get the same results every single time when it comes to really anything you're doing. Certainly not sales and marketing, and certainly not, even engineering. Being in digital. We started out when we started BlogHer. Really, there was no social media. It was blogging. There were some online communities like Tribe and Yahoo groups and stuff like that, but it was all blogs, and it was mostly written. There was Flickr existed, so there was photography going on. YouTube was founded the same year we were, but as time went on, we had to adjust to, oh, you know what? Now there are these things called smartphones, and people aren't looking at everything on their bigger monitor. Like how are we going to be mobile ready? Then video started to become really important. And so even in that business, like you had to constantly be revisiting what are we doing to accommodate how the market changes, how our customers change, how the technology changes. And that means you have to be open to the idea that what was perfect is now insufficient.
So what do you think has been the biggest things you learned while scaling BlogHer?
So we did some things great and we did some things that going back, I wish we had done a little differently. And I will say right up front, I'm not a big person when people say, if you could go back with everything you know now and do things differently, what would you do? And there are very few things I will say qualify for that answer because I didn't know what I know now. It's very hard to put yourself into that situation. We did the best we could possibly do, me and my two co-founders, Lisa Stone and Jory Deja, with our knowledge, our experience, our expertise, the market, like everything. It is very, very, I can kind of think it's a fool's errand to try and say, oh, but if 2025 Elisa went back 20 years, But one thing I will say, we put off fundraising for 2 years and bootstrapped. And I think that was smart. We established value, especially as women who we know are held to a different standard in getting funding. The number when we raised our first round in 2007, only 2% of venture dollars went to companies that were wholly funded by women, like just women, 1, 2, or 3 women, whatever it was. That number hasn't changed like at all. It's still 2%, right? So that's still a lot of money out there for women to go out there and get. It's not like there's no money. It's just the odds, and the standard you are held to. So I think it was the right decision to bootstrap, to build a team, to support ourselves, figure out our revenue streams, have multiple revenue streams. And we had a revenue stream that we developed and then decided, no, this is not a scalable revenue stream. So it helped us get through the first year doing consulting about blogging, but it wasn't part of a scalable business. So we abandoned that. But doing all of that let us go into the funding conversation with real world numbers, real ideas of how to scale the business very precisely. Like we came in and we knew what it would take. So that was super smart. When we raised that first round, I wish we had raised more money right up front. It's funny because you don't always remember things exactly the same as other people who were there. So I've talked to one of my co-founders about this, and she kind of felt like, oh, we raised back then, 2007, we raised $3 million and that was a Series A. Today, that would be like a seed round, right? It's just the metrics have changed so much, but that was our Series A. And her recollection was like, oh, we only got 3 million. And she was not remembering the part of it I remember, which was that we thought 3 million was going to be sufficient. Like we were like, oh, we know what we're doing. We were a little cocky, I think. We've been doing this for 2 years. We know how it's going to go. That's going to get us right into cash flow, positive and profitable. Like we don't want to give away too much of the company. So 3 million is just right. Well, that was 2007. As you may know, 2008 was the year of the financial crash, which rippled through entire industries because if consumers aren't buying, consumer companies aren't buying advertising or sponsoring,
Right.
it was across the board.
It affects everything and building that trust to 2-3 years at least.
Yeah. So, so if we had raised more, we wouldn't have been in the position of raising again so soon and in a not great environment, because our board was really cool. I mean, they were like, we don't believe, with what's going on in the market, we no longer believe your projections for this upcoming year. You get one shot. This is the only time we're ever going to tell you get to go back and do it again and bring it down because we want you to succeed. Because we had kind of made our 2009 budget before things got as ugly as they got, right? So, we needed to raise again and pretty quickly. And that is not a power position to be in. And conditions weren't great in the market. So I tell people when I advise entrepreneurs today, I'm like, first of all, you're really going to need to prove to me that VC funding is the answer for you. Do you know everything you're signing up for when you raise VC funding? And is that really necessary? And then the second thing I say to them is, okay, how much money do you really need to get to your next major milestone that proves the next thing? And can you get that money any other way? Because the more milestones you have hit, the more traction you have, the more proof you have, the better funding conversations you're going to have. And so
the more on a position of power you are.
Yes. So don't tell me you need 3 million, but it's to achieve what seemed to me like pretty modest goals. To hit the most important of those modest goals, how much do you really need? And then can you get that another way? And then go have your funding conversations. But on the other hand, if you do walk in and you know you need VC, and we needed VC because we needed to scale big, because we had the major women's media companies realizing that blogging and ultimately social media were going to be a thing. And they had deep pockets and they were going to come in and just leapfrog over us with money. So we really needed, the point we raised, we really needed to be able to grow quickly. We could have grown organically. That would have been perfectly fine. But to get big enough to stave off those competitors, we needed to grow more quickly than we had the manpower to even handle. But if you're going to raise, tell me the number you think you need and double it and go out and try and get that. Because you do not want to have to go back to the well, because raising money is time consuming. It's brain consuming and it's heart consuming, because you are going to get so many no's. You're going to have so many people not understand. You're going to have, if you're a woman, you're going to have so many guys say, oh, let me talk to my wife about it. You know, like they are incapable of understanding a business model if the target user is a woman, you know? So you're going to have, it's just going to be so draining on your time, on your soul. So make sure you don't have to go back to the well so quickly, not just because of the power factor, but because of it distracts you from actually running your business, right? The first couple of rounds we did, the three of us really raised pretty much together, but then we did 2 more rounds, and those were really led by our co-founder who was the CEO. When, you know, we sort of, that was her job eventually. And it was a job. Like, she spent half her time working with investors and doing all the stuff and eventually managing our M&A experience. And there were other things that she was brilliant at that she didn't get to spend as much time on as would have maybe been helpful for us, because that's a job. So that's some of the stuff I learned about, like on my current project, I'm like, I don't want to raise VC. Like, I don't want it to be that. That's not what I want. You know, I've done that. That's great, but I don't need to do it again.
I've been bootstrapped all my life, right? And I always thought that I was not worthy of VC money in a way, right? You know, being a Latino, not living in the US, like YC wants you to move here to the Bay Area, right? I have a family, so do I really want to do that? You know, kind of thing. A little bit of not worthy, a little bit of not willing, right?
Yes. Yes.
And then on this trip, I happened to found a VC event. I was like, I'm building a platform called PreVetted AI, which is the name of this podcast, right? We did it mostly for branding, but I should call this podcast, you know, Federico is looking for friends. That would be a better, more suited name for the podcast. Anyway, but going back to this, so I went to this meetup summit with a few VCs, mostly asking for feedback for my platform, not necessarily raising money, but I was thinking, well, if I can raise money, I can build faster, I can do this, you know, instead of my resources, I have more resources, right? But as you're saying, it's very time consuming and very, demotivating, because the amount of no's that I was hearing were a lot, right? Some were real VCs, some were judges that were acting as VCs giving feedback, right? So there was not real money behind it, but still they had really good advice, tough questions. It was very interesting to see, because I haven't been to any of those before. So now I'm wondering, do I really need to raise money, right? And what you're saying is pretty much aligned to what I was thinking, right? Like the cost of that, is it worth it?
Well, also, you know, the incentive structure for VCs is geared towards a very particular outcome. And it's not that everyone they invest in gets that outcome. In fact, the vast majority do not. And so I think with anything, like it's similar with publishing a book. Like I wanted to publish a book with a traditional publisher to have that credibility. And what I experienced with that, and I had a great experience making the book, but it was the aftermath of promoting it and distributing it that I was like, book publishers are very much like VCs in that they do take the risk and they invest and pay advances. These traditional publishers, they pay advances to a swath of books, of which maybe 10% really show return. I'm probably being generous when I say 10% on either the VC side or the publishing side, right? And so they are constantly trying to figure out who's my hot star, who's the one I want to invest additional time and money into promoting and helping. They're trying to pick their horse, basically. and everybody else gets maybe the leftovers, but also sometimes gets, especially my experience on the VC side is that a lot of times your investor will be like, well, you need to talk to this other company that we're one of our other portfolio companies. You guys should partner up. Well, it usually turns out that one of you is the hot person, the hot company they're trying to get all their other portfolio companies to partner up with. But what it really means is they're trying to help the horse that they've picked. And for the rest of us, it becomes like, this is actually
an anchor.
Yeah, this is not that helpful to us. And it's a waste of my time. And it's, again, a waste of your time and energy. So I feel like, and I always tell folks sometimes say, oh, you shouldn't be thinking of the exit. You should be thinking about building a great product and service. And I'm like, bullshit, man. Think about the exit and think about a quick one. Doesn't mean you're going to get it, but take those early offers more seriously than you're likely to. I would say that if we had taken earlier M&A discussions more, and pursued those, like we might have ended up with a better outcome for us personally. I don't know if that's equal to would have been a better outcome for all the many, many people that we helped with our company and who made money through our company. Because the thing is, there is an undefinable quality about valuation. Yes, there's the multiples, and yes, there's the income statement, but there's also the people want to back the hot horse again. And you think if you keep going and you keep growing and you keep scaling and you keep doing what you say you're going to do, that of course your valuation is only going to go up and to the right too, right? It makes sense. You're doing all the things, you're making money, but that doesn't take into account that are you now perceived as having been around a while? And if they were going to have a hot exit, wouldn't they have already had a hot exit? And maybe there's someone around the corner who's like going to be the new hotter version of that, right? So you stick around a little too long and all of a sudden you're doing what you're doing, but the perception of your value is going down because people naturally expect there's got to be something hotter and better. If they've been around 6 years, like, wouldn't they have already done something, been acquired by Meta or Google or whatever the hot companies are in their space, So I'm always telling entrepreneurs to think about the exit from day one, take every conversation, and don't count on, your valuation will only grow as long as you keep growing, because it's not true. It's not how it plays out.
Interesting. I haven't thought about it that way. I mean, I built my company not to do an exit, but to give a job to my people, right? And help them grow and, grow together with them. Again, it was a service company, we were doing recruiting, we've been doing recruiting and staffing, right? And this new platform is something new that we're building. So this is new.
But once you take money, you are obligated to find an exit for those investors, right?
Yes.
So if you're not building for an exit, why are you taking someone else's money? You're promising them, you're going to get this money back. So there are only a few ways to do that: IPO, sale, or you buy your company back, you pay them back yourself because you've grown so much, but you don't want to do an IPO or sale. But you're making a commitment. They're not giving you money because they're not giving anyone money because they're great people who deserve to keep building. They're giving them money to make a return. And that is the risk they take. I'm not discounting the risk they take, but they're also, most of them, risking other people's money most of the time. So, the limited partners.
Yeah. I read Peter Thiel from Zero to One, right? And, he talks about these unicorns companies, but what he's not telling on the book, and I think that this is truth for most VCs, if not all, is, and you're kind of validating what I'm thinking, is they have these unicorn companies or these companies that are going to 100x or whatever, right? They're going to generate enough revenue for the losses of all these other 10, 20, 50 companies, right?
Correct.
Yeah. And then you have founders that have been working on those companies for 5 or 10 years or whatever. And what they get after 10 years is less money than if as a minimum salary, right? Or taking they would have make more money if they taking a corporate job, right? Less fun, right? But more stable, right? So that's what they don't tell you on the book, right?
Yeah,
or you see Messi, right? You see Maradona, right? Big football players. I'm Argentinian, so Maradona was an asshole, but still, he was a good football player. But you see that guy, but you don't see all the hundreds and thousands of people that get dropped in the middle, right? In the process.
Right. But You brought up something which actually speaks more to my current project, optionality, because you said, oh, it's more stable to get a job. And
George.
I'm not sure that's true anymore. Like, whereas at least if you're talking about tech and media, I think the most stable thing you can do is, even if you have a job, to be building your other lines of revenue, to be thinking about what other ways you can leverage your expertise and knowledge, and to be having irons in the fire, and to not sacrifice your life for a company that would lay you off tomorrow, and often not even for a really valid reason. Like, I just think my whole philosophy, about what is stable versus not stable, is that people who stay in a job and then don't have the job often feel a lot more lost about what to do about it, often feel their identity tied much more. I think because I changed careers so often and learned new things and tried new things, I don't feel like my identity is what I do. I don't feel my identity is where I work. I'm just a whole bunch of things. I'm not trying to pretend I'm one person on LinkedIn and a different person. Like, do I craft the way I talk a little differently? Maybe, but I'm like, you can go online, you can know everything about me, personal, political, professional. That's all I'm trying to be. And that means that anyone who works with me is cool with all that stuff about me. Like, and
Right.
they need to be, right? Because I'm not going to stop any of it, because I'm a human being with a full life. And I think people who have committed to the job as the most stable thing, I think their risk is really high. If something happens to that job, they have only a few routes they can go because they've cemented a path. And I'm like, break up just like blow up the single path you think you're on that's up and to the right and advancing in a company, which before I left the hardware company I left in 2003 and eventually started BlogHer, that's what I thought. I mean, my role model was my mom, who was a second wave feminist, started as a part-time research associate at a firm and became their first woman VP. Like, I thought that's what I was just going to do. And then the dot-com bust happened. I realized I was miserable in my job and had hit this ceiling where they were never going to let me advance past a certain point. And I was like, this is not the answer. Like, so I never planned to go into business for myself. I never planned to be an entrepreneur at all. I planned to climb the corporate ladder. But I realized, luckily, pretty early that was way too dependent on other people, and a small number of other people seeing my value and agreeing on my value. And if I diversified what I was doing, I was more dependent on myself and had more opportunities to find other people to have value and offer me value in the form of revenue, so.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I agree that diversification, it's a much better strategy. The company man, company woman, it's falling apart on both sides, right? So yeah. The I think that I draw the line is on that subject is people now are doing, they call it overemployment, and basically they're taking two remote full-time
Yeah.
jobs, with the same arguments that you're saying, but I think that's unfair, you know, unethical at least, probably illegal, almost, right? Because you're selling your time twice.
Well, that brings up the whole interesting question. Are they paying for your time, or are they paying for your deliverables? Like, I don't think I would do that, because I don't think I want to work two full-time jobs and have the responsibilities. Like, that doesn't sound fun to me at all. I'm more of a fractional, like, let me be your fractional, CMO
Right.
or COO or whatever it is. Let me have really strong articulated boundaries around what deliverables I'm signed up for. And then I can make a good decision about how many fractional gigs I can really carry at one time. And you learn over time that what you think your capacity is isn't really what your capacity, because deliverables don't reflect all the undefined communication and thinking and planning around those deliverables. But I do think in general that people, I think the idea of giving 110% to one company is kind of dead, because they do not give 110% to you. You are not protected. There are no more pensions. There are no more, there is, and I think companies have built a world where people don't trust the idea that giving 110% to a company is worth it. I spoke to someone a couple months ago, many years at one of the big, well, I'll just say it, at Meta. And when they laid people off, they said it was for performance when it wasn't. And that just seems purposefully harmful. Why did they feel the need to harm these people? And that's the same thing they're doing in the federal government here in the US, like trying to pretend it's about performance when it's not. I don't think the biggest employers, which the federal government is one of the biggest employers in the country, I don't think the biggest employers are creating or fostering an environment where people trust companies and are therefore willing to trade 110% of their capacity for that company. And what that's doing is actually more damaging for smaller companies and medium companies, because the bigger companies can probably afford to pay people enough and get people to come work for them and give great benefits. And so they're hedging their bets that they can treat people like shit when they want to, but when they want people, they can make it worth their while. But if you're fostering a whole environment where people don't trust full-time employment, I don't think that's great for the companies that don't have the pocketbook to just pay what it takes anytime they need to and then treat people terribly and still recover from it. There's only a few companies that can really behave that way, and they're doing it. They are taking advantage of their size and their cash on hand to do exactly that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, it's what's the point of saying that it was low performance when it actually wasn't? I mean, if there are layoffs, they are layoffs, right? I don't see there is no benefit for the company either, only just for the employee, right? And I think that's unfair because I mean, yeah, I mean what when I mean I started my company bootstrap. So when I start hiring people, I had the experience of working for a company, a startup that stopped paying salaries for 4 or 5 months.
Wow.
I was a college student, I was there for fun, for the experience, and they were paying me. My cost living was very small, almost zero. For me, everything was great, right? I mean, ish. It did affect me, but I didn't have to support a family. That's what I'm trying to say. So, but I've seen saw because they were my friends, my colleagues, people's faces, how that relationship were off. Actually, they owe me like 3 or 4 months. So at one point, I came to the CEO and I said, well, you owe me this money. How about you pay me with this computer, right? The computer that I was using, right? For them, it was like, yeah, sure, whatever, just small money. For me, it was a great win because
Yeah.
now I had a computer to work on, right?
Yeah.
So, for me, I was able to get away pretty well with that, but I was in that position, not everybody. So when I built my company, I owe to myself not to do that, right? Not to be that asshole, right? So
Right.
so
Well,
what we've done is we build months of buffer, right? How many months without revenue can we pay the bills, right? Because when somebody joins as an employee, they are basically putting their financial stability in our hands, right? That's how I see it, right? And I try to respect that and value that, right? And then people can have good performance, people can have bad performance, right? But that's a whole different thing, right? And then what I do get upset is when I see bad actors, people that act in bad faith, right? That either they lie that they have another job, a full-time job, or they break the computer that we give them because they leave him, outside and it rains, right? And it's like they don't care, right? Because it's a company computer, so you know. So that's what upsets me, right? And then people lying to my face, right? But when I see people that are doing the best they can, and then the outcome is not what I was expecting, then even though it upsets me that we didn't achieve whatever, but I try to be as supportive as possible because they're doing their best, right?
people management is not so different from the whole marketing funnel, which is that when something doesn't hit the way you want it to, is it the fact that the promotional, what you were offering, your marketing language, your channel, whatever it is, wasn't the right one? Or was it that it worked and people came to look at your offer and get more information, and where they landed wasn't great and didn't explain it and didn't convert them? Like when you're looking at every step of the marketing journey, there are different points, touch points with the customer, right? And what you're challenged with is figuring out which part of this journey didn't work? Where did we lose people? The same thing in web design, where are people dropping out? Where have we made it too hard for them? So I think we need to have the same introspection. And that gets more complicated when you sold ads to media, and is it their fault? Or you used a third party programmatic ad company, is it their fault? You used a web designer, is it their fault? Like, whose fault is it? And eventually you come back to, did I articulate the problem? Did I review the solutions? Did I make the right choices on vendors? Like, there's a way when you're the leader, there's a way you can always end up looking in the mirror and say, well, where did I go wrong? A lot of times I have found with people management, it does come back to, how did you pick them? How did you vet them? How did you prepare them? How did you communicate what you needed and wanted? How did you keep an eye on it? How did you manage them? How did you respond before the big letdown, and what of those things could have been fixed? So it wasn't just about them being bad at their job. Sometimes people are, like you say, sometimes they're not actually putting the effort in. I'll never forget the first person I ever had to fire for cause. I checked with, this was years ago, nice guy, product manager for one of our products. And I had hired him and liked him. And he just at some point stopped performing, like nothing was happening. I felt like nothing was happening. And I felt like I wasn't getting reporting from him adequately. I felt like he wasn't moving things forward. And I talked to HR before deciding to finally terminate him. And I showed them these email threads of me being, okay, like I need to have, this is when the deadline is for that. I need to have, like, being really clear, trying to be really, really, really clear. And they were like, you've been more than clear. If he's surprised, that's on him, right? So in the conversation, when I go to let him know today's your last day, like this has not been working out, he comes to tell me that his dad had been diagnosed with cancer and he had been going up to Sacramento to take care of his dad, and, this whole long story. Now, for a while, I was like, to myself, why didn't he ever come to me? Why didn't he ever tell me? But then years later, I think about it a little differently. And I'm like, why did I never say what happened at this point where he was doing fine and then things went off the rails? Why did I never say, what's going on in your personal life? Like, what's happening? Do you need support? Do you need a leave? Do you need, I didn't find it out. He didn't offer it. He never once mentioned anything about it. But I also didn't make it safe for him to do so, because I didn't ever do anything but harp on, like, this is what I expect and you are not delivering on what I expect. You really need to do X, Y, and Z. So contrast that with, like, 15 years later, one of our really, really valued employees offered her resignation. And she didn't report directly to me anymore. We had grown. And I was like, this is not okay. And I asked the person, like, why? And she was like, oh, she needs to move on or whatever. She seems pretty set on it. Right. And, HR sometimes will train you to not, if someone's already given notice, they're unsalvageable, right? They've made up their mind. That's a message you get a lot, to not try. But I was like, oh my God, this will be a loss. So I called her up and I'm like, I do not accept your resignation. Like, why don't you tell me what's going on? So it just turned out that she wanted to move back. At the time, we had some remote days, but most people, half our workforce worked in the Bay Area and came into the office at least some number of days a week. We had a New York office, a bunch of people were out there. We had some early employees that were all over the place, but she had been hired to come into the Bay Area office, and she came into the Bay Area office. And so it turns out she was tired of living in San Francisco. She wanted to move back down to Southern California where her family was. She wanted to go to her next stage of life. She wanted, like, when she got married and had kids, she wanted it to be in Southern California. So why is she going to stay? She had gotten older. We hired her when she was like 25, and it was 6 years later or something. And her life was just, and I'm like, so what made you think you couldn't still do your job from Southern California? And she had made assumptions about that we would not be okay with this. And I was like, let's try it. Like, it's totally worth trying it. But I feel like, why wouldn't that work? Plenty of people work remotely. She moved down to Southern California. She stayed with us until past when we were acquired. She stayed for a while. I don't remember if she left before I left the acquiring company, but she stayed a good long time after that conversation. And she got married and she had her kid and she lives near her family. And I had just learned that just ask the questions, and really care about the answer. Like, I know sometimes people ask you questions and you don't feel like they don't really care. Why am I going to tell them? Why am I going to be vulnerable? Why am I going to be open? If you gotta,
Right.
if you're managing people, you have to sincerely care about the answers. If you ask someone a question, you have to sincerely care what the answer is. And, maybe it would have been a reason we couldn't have managed around, but it wasn't at all. In fact, I was shocked she felt like that was her choice. Like I thought wow, we have remote employees. Why doesn't she assume she can be one? But she just had gotten into a way of thinking about her job that we needed to adapt on both our ends.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, sometimes, employees don't realize that they have options and they can do different things. So very interesting that you can, recover a good employee with, by just
Yeah.
connecting with people.
The conventional wisdom is that you don't, once someone's given their notice, like
It's
even,
done.
yeah, they're done. And sometimes people, of course, sometimes counter and stuff, but their mindset is that they're not going to take it, or if they take it, they're still a short timer. And then they treat them that way. And then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, So I'm like,
Right.
either sincerely try to retain them or let them go, but don't try to retain them and then judge them for the fact that they ever put you in that position. I think that's what happens.
Right. I've been able to, throughout the years, do better on recruiting and screening. What we've been doing is technical screening. I started with people that I know, that I personally know, right? Because I've been working towards providing the highest quality candidates at the lowest possible cost, right? People in Mexico working in companies in the US. That's what I've been doing for the last 10 years, right? Setting the right expectations, right? Sometimes a candidate doesn't quite have all the skills. So we build a plan to get that people to the level. We build a commitment with the candidates. We present the opportunity to the manager. We say, oh, this guy is missing this and this and this, but I can offer you 50% discount. This guy commits to work on it. In 6 months, we can, we can get to the level that you need.
Yeah.
I know I can do it in a month. I know somebody else can do it in 2 or 3 months, whatever, right? So we build plans with contingencies to exceed expectations, right? And the managers loves it because it's a great opportunity, right? The candidate loves it because you're giving me the opportunity to learn and get up to speed. They appreciate it more, so they stay for longer. And they get up to speed, they learn whatever they need to learn. And, we had people like that working for 6, 7 years in our teams. It's for me that's amazing because you were talking about the misfits. So I found some misfits that are great people. They have great skills, but they lack on personal communication. They get distracted, time management issues, right? To one of that guys, I actually sold him my car in an interest-free loan, right? So he could visit his son, so he could be on time to our meeting, so he could, have more freedom and basically support him, right? He was living in the city and his family was an hour away, 2 hours away in another town. His son was having through some difficulties. He was eager to see his dad, right? I could see it on every company meeting where the meeting family would show up. So I tried to help him as much as possible, and he stayed with us for 7 years, right? And he's been really great, right? He was fired less than a year, one job after another, right? Because he would not fit, right? So I work with him a lot, right, on his personal communication skills, right? So yeah, I understand what you're saying. Sorry, I'm going off
Yeah.
topic,
No,
but yeah.
it's a great story.
I wanted to ask you a question about hiring women, um, and tell you a little bit my experience, what has been. At one point, my approach was, oh, I want to do 50% women, 50% men, right? But the percentage of female engineers is like 3% or 5%, at least in Mexico. It's very small, smaller than in the US. So if I was going through that route, the quota route, I call it, we were going to hire less qualified candidates. That's for sure, right? Because if we said 50%, I mean, we're a small company, but if we said 50% towards a 3% market, we
How
were
many
going to hire
engineers are we talking about? How many do you need to hire?
50. We have a team of 50 people, between multiple roles, right? Not only engineering, we have admins, we have, my wife is the co-founder of the company. We have, so we have some women on the team, but I wanted to achieve the 50%, right? So that was my first approach. That was the flaw that I saw in that approach. Eventually, we tried. The feedback that I got from recruiting team is we post a job and then women apply only if they fit 100% of the requirements. Men only 30, right? And then we screen based on that, right? So for me, what I didn't want to do is like lower standard to hire more women, right? More women. So we did another job post with different language for women, right? To be more approachable. And that worked a little bit. Eventually, I got to the conclusion that we shouldn't lower the standard to hire more women. We should say, okay, this is a standard that the job requires and encourage women to get to that level. So what we did is we started a community called
I would
IT
say
Girls.
encourage women who are at that level to see you as a place where they want to apply.
Yes. We did both actually. So we did a community called IT Girls where we invite senior engineers, product managers, designers, people that made it, if you like, right? They never made it. They're still working on it. Everybody is, and then we invited women from students to juniors to the junior, the better, because the whole ethos of that is you can do it. She's done it. You can do it. Go for it, apply. These are the things that people are looking to. These are the resources you can use to learn more. This is, these are the things that we are hiring. We need. We encourage you to apply, even though you might not feel 100%. So with that, we saw a surge on applicants, right? But mostly we saw the same people showing up on the meeting. Some women showing up on the meetings. I try to organize everything and just stay behind, not be the face, right?
Right.
So again, to not, I encourage my wife to lead the meetings. I encourage my female recruiter, head of recruitment, to organize the events and talk to them. And I just stand back, right? And they were able to open up more, share more of their concerns and their ideas, right? And it's been great, right? So that was my experience. And my question is, what has been your experience?
Well, I have so many thoughts. So, first of all, like when it comes to this 3% number, I think it depends what that number represents. In the United States, the women in STEM degrees in college peaked actually, and it's gone down a little bit. And so I think it's 30 something percent right now, right? But that's 30% every year. So it's not 30% of all the people out there. It's that every year there are new people coming into the workforce who are women who have gotten these STEM degrees, right? So you have a cumulative effect. Even if it was there are only 3% of your STEM graduates in Mexico are women, that's 3% every year. That's probably hundreds and hundreds of people. So no one is asking anyone to lower their standards in order to hire to quotas. But what I will say is you never achieve anything that you don't put a goal around and incent. So a lot of people say we have a goal around parity, but they're not judging any manager on how they achieve that. Is your recruiter, and you can start by saying, who are you interviewing? Who are you screening? Who are you interviewing at every step of the process? And it's like the marketing thing. Where do people fall away, right? And how are people incented and rewarded for finding more people for you to choose from? Because you just told me a whole story about a guy who was not really good at personal communications, which is a soft skill or leadership skill, really, that's very important, including in engineering, because engineering is not just code. It's it's negotiating and validating around what the path is going to be and then figuring it out, right? You went through a whole process to bring that guy along and help him when he had been having problems. So he didn't have 100% of what you really needed for that role either. You had to develop the place where he was lacking. And so we easily do that for some people and for some things. So where are you? How are you setting goals? How are you rewarding people for achieving goals? And what is the accountability if you don't achieve goals? And some people might tell me, well, that's just a quota after all. But I'm like, well, everything we do in business is a quota. We set sales goals. We set all kinds of goals, right? And the fact is, if you don't put a goal around it, you don't achieve it. So, and part of that is this idea of who we encountered this all the time we had conferences where we needed speakers, we had a website where we needed writers, we hired people. And so much of how that works is people put out a call for speakers. People put out a job posting for writers and for roles. And all of that counts on people coming to you and finding you and knowing who you are and knowing that that's a good place to want to work or write or speak. And where is the room for you're not finding someone who doesn't know you exist yet, but who's perfect for you? And so some ways that companies achieve that here anyway, is they go out to conferences for women in engineering or HBCUs if they want to hire more Black people. The Grace Hopper Celebration Conference has a huge recruiting arm because thousands of women in STEM go to this conference in the US every year. And most of the companies that sponsor are doing so from their recruitment departments. But they are going out into, so it's not just trying to bring people to you and assuming if they don't apply, they must not exist. If they don't apply, it might be that they don't know you exist, right? So how do you, so it's a smart tactic to say, we're going to create this group because through creating this group, they're going to learn that we exist and that we would be a great place for them to work. But again, it's not like I would say, oh, I want to have 50% of my, engineers be women right now. But I might say I'm going to insist that an interview group that when we're interviewing for people that you can pick a number, maybe it doesn't start as 50%, but we are going to interview, X percent of our candidates are going to be women and we're going to talk to them. Because if men are applying when they're at 30%, you're not telling me that every man that you interview is at 100%. Some of them are not, right? So, I think it's about kind of rethinking about the milestones in the journey of getting to a very totally worthy goal, especially who are your customers? Are your customers a lot of women? It's great to have engineers and developers who are developing, that match the customer group that you're working with, right? And they bring a different perspective that might be helpful. So I would think about these things as how do you set a goal? How do you reward? How do you hold people accountable? And how do you get yourself out there so you don't just wait for everyone to come to you? You go out and make yourself known and you go to them and you figure out where they are, because every university has probably a women in engineering cohort or a women in physics cohort at every school that is, every college and university. It's not hard to find out where these people are, where your next great hire could be. And I always say with engineering, like with tech, nobody 5 years out of college, 10 years out of college is doing what they learned in college, because technology evolves and moves. And my spouse is an engineer and their last job was at one of the very, very, very big tech companies. And he worked there, he's basically retired now, but he worked there 16 years. And he ended up programming in a language he hadn't used before, because they had shifted what kind of language they were going to use. And he learned it. And they had confidence that he would learn it, because he had programmed in all these other languages and done all these other adjustments throughout his career for the technology that he was working on. And so I always remember when I first started blogging, and taught myself HTML, little CSS, but mostly HTML. And I would get so frustrated with myself because I could never remember the HTML command for adjusting the height and width of a photo. That was like the thing I always seemed to like, what is it again? And I would go on the internet, and I would search and I would find it. And so one day I was complaining to him and I was saying, I can't remember this thing. And he at the time, it would be different today, but at the time at his desk, he had books, like all these programming books. And he goes, you see all these books? Do you think that I remember every command in all the languages I work in all the time? No, these are reference materials. And sometimes I need to pull down my reference materials and remind myself how to write a command that I'm looking to write. And of course, today he would do it on the internet too. Like there's no books lining his desk anymore. But, so he says that's what people do. Like they use reference materials, and if you don't remember something, you look it up, and then it's knowing how to use it. It's knowing what you want to do with it. It's knowing what you want to say, right? So I think on the one hand, starting this group and providing real value for people is a great idea. But I think on the other hand, I would kind of remove from your lexicon the idea that you won't sacrifice quality for diversity because no one's asking you to. What they're asking you to do is to create goals, have rewards and incentives lined up to support those goals and start treating it like you would any other business issue, which is figure out where you need to go to get what you need and figure out what are the core things that you're willing to work with someone on and help develop them, and what are the core things that you're not. And because the reason women, I mean, this is the thing that always kind of gets passed over. Yes, women wait till they're 100% before they apply for things or put themselves out for things, because they are not rewarded when they don't do that, because there is a legacy of putting yourself out for something and having the person who would accept 30%, qualification from a guy without thinking about it and assuming they can figure out the rest, but they will nitpick on the 10% the woman doesn't have and use it as a reason she's not qualified. I'm not saying you do that. I'm saying statistically, the people, that is what happens. Women go into a VC meeting and they're asking men all sorts of questions about promise and potential and future vision. And they're asking women about how are you going to handle it when this goes wrong and when that goes wrong and when this goes wrong. It's like proven, they want proof versus potential. Women versus men.
Right.
And so you have to start by asking yourself, where am I carrying that thinking and how can I blow it up?
Yes. I mean, the situation you were talking about, your employee that wouldn't speak up, right? I think that coming up from a position of care allows you to understand better. So I think that that's different than, we're going to ask you to do less because of your gender, right? That's completely different, but this is similar in the sense that if you go from a position of care, then you can have a better understanding, and then from there you can facilitate the other person to achieve, to move forward.
I mean,
right?
you described a whole process where you convinced a company to hire someone who wasn't all there because you had a plan for them to get there on something they were lacking, something you didn't think they were quite qualified at that moment for this element of their job, but you had a plan to get them there. When I was first a product manager, which wasn't my first job in tech, I started out I started as an admin in a marketing department, and then I became like a marketing associate. And then because it was the dot-com boom, I hopped to another company and went right in as a product manager. I did not, and the technology at the new company was different than the technology at the first company. So I had to learn it, but I had other skills that helped me do that, which is communication, which is negotiation, which is asking the right questions, which is, yes, I had an aptitude, right? I had proved that in my first role, that I had an aptitude to learn this stuff and talk about it and translate it into good copy for marketing and product marketing materials. And then I just had to do it all over again, learning a new technology, finding a new guy who wanted to sit there and explain RF engineering to me or physical layer technology when the other one had been fiber optics and digital. I just had to find the people who would help me develop and keep going. And that was a great time because two things. It was a great time because being the boom that it was, people needed people really badly. And I think people hired people, like if you meet someone and you say, they're smart, they're going to figure it out. They're smart, they're hungry, they're going to figure it out. And people were hiring people who just were smart and hungry. Like they just wanted to learn. They wanted to advance. They wanted to do a great job, right? The second thing that was great is that before, I kind of lay this at Google's feet. Before Google, product management was was kind of housed in the marketing function in the tech companies. It was like product management.
Oh, really?
Yeah, product management, product marketing communications was kind of the spectrum. And then product management was the role that interfaced between engineering and sales to help translate needs into features and translate features into selling points, right? That was the role of product management. Google was really, from what I understand, Google was really the first one that was making being an engineer a prerequisite to be a product manager. So there were tons of women product managers. When I was a product manager, I mean, I was often the only woman in the room, but I knew other women product managers. I knew quite a lot. And then tech went through this phase where it was like a culling mechanism, and it kind of gatekept this function, which is really about communication and translation and negotiation and compromise and all this kind of stuff, and turned it into another engineering function because these were such engineering centric companies. I mean, you hear that a lot about the early days of all these internet companies was that they considered themselves engineering driven. That's why so many of them didn't have that much of a business model even when they started. They were just they were just developing the tech. Anyway, that's like Silicon Valley history 101. But so I would just, you've got all the right ingredients and ideas, I think, to put it together and get to where you want to get eventually. But if you don't set a goal for how that happens, then I think it's just pretty hard to say you're going to achieve it.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean the what we've done is we've done that community. I learned a lot by just listening there. It's a different dynamic on the conversation. Is a completely different dynamic than when you have a bunch of male engineers, right? It's completely different, right? And because I was actively trying not to participate, right, and just listening, I learned a lot, right? And that allow us to do better on the hiring side, right? So that has been better. We haven't achieved 50-50, and I don't think that's necessarily a relevant metric per se, right? But rather than giving more opportunities, helping them, achieve more, grow more, right? Because some of these women eventually ended up on other companies, right? So for me, that's a win. Maybe not a win on the company, but a win on the initiative, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so
Exactly.
that worked. And
Yeah.
the female employees that we have in the company are amazing, are one of the hardest working people that we have. There's that, right? So that's kind of why I wanted to incentivize more women to get into tech. What do you want to achieve this year on the next 12 months or so?
Yeah. So I'm working on this project Optionality, which is a community for people who want to lead a more optionality driven life and develop that ability to have a portfolio career, to have many irons in the fire. Ultimately, the goal would be to start to evangelize that even big companies should adopt that, and not in a gig worker way, but in a way that is, if you're a fractional employee, you get fractional benefits, you get proportional, because right now it's very binary. You're either a full-time employee and you get access to ownership and benefits and PTO, or you're a consultant or contractor and you get nothing, right? None of that. And there's no law that says it has to be that way. So ultimately that's the vision, that you purpose hire people and they get purposely, proportional benefits across the spectrum, and it would be better for companies and workers. And when we started it, we thought, oh, it's going to be a bunch of, I started it with one of my BlogHer co-founders. We were working together again, and we thought it's going to be for people like us who are pretty seasoned. We don't want to go back to working full time. We want to keep our options open. We want to have many irons in the fire. But what we realized is that Gen Z is coming into the marketplace, having witnessed how the workplace has changed over the last 5-10 years. They walk into the job market feeling like they want to have their options open. They want to have many irons in the fire. They want to have optionality. So really, I think this is the now. People talk about the future of work. This is the now of work, and a whole bunch of companies aren't really accepting that yet. But optionality.life is the URL, and it's content and convening, bringing people together and creating connections and helping people build this life. And that's what I'm focused on. The other thing I'm focused on is politics, because I don't know how you can live in this world and not care about politics. So I like to do a lot of research oriented, like dig a little deeper and explain things a little differently than sometimes I see it happen. Online discourse is it's a trip, right? So I'm just trying to be like one little calm voice who talks about data and stuff, but about politics. So that's like my avocation. That's my passion. And my vocational passion is talking about optionality and helping entrepreneurs. And I coach and consult with entrepreneurs, and I'm advising a couple of companies. And, so I've got a lot going on because I have an optionality driven life. I have a portfolio career. And you can find me at elisacp.com.
Yes, we're going to put the links on the description of the episode so people can reach out, and that way they can connect with you.
Sounds good.
And I'm very interested to see how optionality, I hope I pronounce it correctly.
Yes.
Optionality, yes, it's growing, because it sounds a very interesting project. We did hire some people fractional. It's been interesting. Some, again, it's like when you're hiring full time, so, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work, but most has been a positive experience. So I encourage other people to do it as well.
Awesome. Great. Well, it was great
Great.
talking to you.
Great talking to you, Elisa. Thank you very much.